Welcome back for the evening session of the 50th Observance Conference here in Santa Barbara, sponsored by the Oswald Innocence Campaign, which was founded by Ralph Cinque, and with live streaming audio complements a Revolution Radio and Loren Fenton, who is here with us today. It's my great pleasure to introduce a man whose background and insight has proved to be a gold mine in relation to the resolution of a long-standing issue about the identity of the man in the doorway. Ralph Cinque, by virtue of his experience as a professional chiropractor, where he deals with individuals who want to get into shape, who want to fit their clothing better, who want to look smarter, had the insight to recognize that this much contested question could be resolved if we paid attention to the height, the weight, the build, the clothing, the t-shirt, the shirt that the man in the doorway was wearing. It was a revolutionary insight because efforts had been made to obfuscate the facial features. And where, in response to a question previously asked to which the answer was not forthcoming, I believe this individual's prominence was so considerable that he was captured in so many different photographs and films that it was impossible to remove him from those pieces of photography, and therefore they did their best to obfuscate his appearance, but where Ralph had the genius to see how it could be resolved. So please join me in welcoming the founder of the Oswald Innocence Campaign, Ralph Cinque.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, let me begin by saying that Oswald in the Doorway is the bedrock issue of the Oswald Innocence Campaign. If we didn't have it, we would still have a campaign because there's plenty of other evidence that exonerates Oswald without this. But the fact is, he was in the doorway. We have the evidence for it. We have the images. And it's something that we have to use. It is the most powerful evidence of his innocence. It is something that is compelling. It's very moving to people when they can actually see images of him standing with his hands clasped, just like this, in front of his body. His hands were clasped in front of his body harmlessly during the actual shooting of Kennedy. And remember that we're in a fight. We're in a fight here, and it's a fight to the finish. And in a way, it's like a boxing match where if you know your opponent has been cut over his left eye, that if you're a smart fighter, you're going to hit it. You're going to hone in on that weak spot, and you're going to try to open it up. And in this case, the official story of JFK is cut open and bleeding at the point of Oswald standing in the doorway. This is their weakest spot, and that's why we have to hit it. So I'm hoping today to convince you that it's really true that Oswald was standing in the doorway. And if I succeed, I want to ask you a favor, which is that when you talk to people about the JFK assassination, that you always bring up the fact that Oswald was standing in the doorway. Don't leave it out, because this is the strongest card in our hand. It's the ace of spades, and we need to play it for all it's worth. Now, where's the clicker that I use?
Just press right here.
Right here?
Yeah, just down each one.
Okay, all right, down each one. Okay, this is the first slide. Of course, this is the Alchin's photo, and you can see the square area in red, which shows the doorway, and it shows the man in the doorway. But before we talk about him, you probably can't see it too well, but Kennedy is in that limo, and he is reacting to being shot. He is bringing his hands up to his neck, and it is a reaction to being shot in the neck. He was shot in the front from the neck. And just as an aside, I want you to know that clinically it's impossible for Kennedy to have been shot through the back of the neck and have had a bullet go all the way through his neck, through the whole diameter of his neck, and come out the front, because that would have been such a catastrophic trauma that he would have been completely disabled from that. He certainly would not have been able to sit upright. He may have even lost consciousness. But if you look at the Zapruder film, you can see that Kennedy is intact. He's quite whole. He's posturally intact. His whole neurological functioning he's moving his muscles. And that could never be if he really had the injury that they claim he did. So he was shot from the front in the neck. And he also was shot at that point in the back. He was hit in the back at the level of the third thoracic vertebra. And it's a very strange thing about that bullet, because it went in, but it didn't come out. It did not traverse him. And it's really quite a mystery as to why it petered out and what happened to it. Was it dug out of him? Did it fall out of him? Was it an ice bullet that just melted? And frankly, I don't know the answer to that, and I'm waiting for Jim Fetzer to clarify that when it's his turn. But the point is that the assassination is already underway, and, whoops, what happened? Whoops. All right, we'll leave it here. The assassination is underway, and Oswald is standing there, and people from all over the world saw the Alchin's photo, and they immediately thought to themselves, Oswald, that's Oswald. Now, I want you to know that they were basing that on two considerations. The first was just anatomically, physically, he looked like Oswald. But the second thing was that they recognized Oswald's clothes. And that was a tremendous advantage, because most of the time, if you're comparing photographs of somebody, you don't have the advantage of the clothing, because they're from different days, and people change their clothes from day to day, and so the clothes become just a neutral factor. But in this case, it was from the same day, and even the Warren Commission admitted that Oswald did not change his shirt. He did not change it. So therefore we can use it, we can look at it, and when we do, we see that it is a spot-on match to the clothing that Oswald wore. Now, whoops. Let's go back here. These are the Fritz notes. Fritz was the detective, the head of the homicide division of the Dallas Police, and he was the leader of the investigation from the standpoint of the Dallas Police. He probably spent more time interrogating Oswald than any other person. He prepared these notes. You can see that they're very cryptic, they're scribbled, they're not even very legible, and that's the reason why we have this typed version. But I want to point out that one of the things he wrote down was that Oswald told him that he was out with Bill Shelley in front. Now, you can't overestimate how devastating this is to the official story, because basically this tells us that Oswald told him that he was outside, just as we can see him. Now, I have a lot of adversaries out there, believe it or not, and I can tell you what they're going to say in response to this, and I want to rebut them before they listen to this speech, to pull the rug out from underneath them. They're going to say that what Oswald meant was that he was out with Bill Shelley in front after the assassination. Well, that is impossible, because Bill Shelley left the entrance immediately after the assassination, and I mean within seconds. The first officer to get to the entrance was Marion Baker, who was a motorcycle cop. And he got to those steps probably in less than 15 seconds after the last shot. Shelley and Lovelady, both of them together, walked down to the railroad crossing. They were part of a throng of people who descended on the lower part of Daley Plaza to look around. And from a distance, they turned around and saw Marion Baker hastening up the stairs to enter the building. So they were gone immediately. And when they returned to the depository, they didn't go back to the front. They went around to the back. They re-entered through the back door. And then they were in there for a long time. They were given things to do. They were told to guard the freight elevator. Then they were told to take the police up to the 6th floor and give them a tour. So they were doing all that. And at the time that Oswald left, which was no later than 1235, Shelley was definitely not outside. He could not have been, so there's absolutely no chance that they were right about that. Anyway, this... okay. This, of course, is the blow-up of Larry Rivera. Where's that thing to use the pointer? Yeah. All right, so this is the man in the doorway. The first thing I want you to notice is if we draw a plumb line down from his chin, just a gravitational line down, and I'm just going to do it here even though my hand isn't too steady, what we notice is that his wrist is right below his chin. It's really it's centered below his chin. Now, you know that when a person is just standing watching something and they're not using their arms, what do? They let their arms dangle. They don't fall to the floor. They just fall as long as your arms are. But you don't expend any energy to hold your arms up. And you don't expend your energy doing anything with your arms if you're just not doing anything with them. But in this case, he definitely has his arm swung over to the midline. Now, if you were just doing that, as an isolated movement, it would get very tiring and very uncomfortable very quickly. The only possibility here is that he is resting his arm on something. And I'll explain that more further, but I want you to just think about that he's got to be resting his arm on something. All right, here we have a collage which happens to be the very first collage I ever made. I have over 1,000 collages on my computer, and this was collage number 1. And you have Oswald on the left, and you have the doorway man on the right. And first of all, I want you to notice the general likeness in terms of the shape of the face, the size of the man, the overall frame, which is slender, and also the clothing. Both, you can see, are wearing a long-sleeved shirt that is unbuttoned and rather sprawled open, exposing a white T-shirt. Now, that may not sound all that distinguishing, right? Maybe at first glance it may seem to you like, well, 2 men could be wearing a long-sleeved shirt that's unbuttoned over a white T-shirt. But you have to remember how vast the world of clothing is. There's so many other possibilities. Jim, why is this moving by itself? Well, there's only so much time. Oh, I see. I'll have to keep going back to it. Okay. But I just want to quickly point out that if the shirt had been short-sleeved, that would have nixed the association. Or if it had been long-sleeved, just as we see it, but it wasn't unbuttoned, where it just had the normal amount of buttoning, which is to say mostly buttoned, that would have nixed it. If he had on a jacket over it, a sweater, he could have been wearing a poncho. Instead of being a button-up shirt, it could have been a pullover shirt, like a polo shirt. Or it could have been a sweatshirt. Or it could have been one of those pullover shirts that's got just a few buttons that you pull over and then button. It could have been a shirt and tie, like a businessman would wear. He could have had a vest on. There's so many possibilities of clothing. So my point is that to see that much match in clothing between these two is mathematically very strong, where you've got it narrowed down to a very, very specific thing. And the odds that Billy Lovelady woke up that morning and decked himself out exactly the same as Oswald, putting on the same kind of clothes and also wearing them the exact same way, is extremely unlikely. Now, this here is the most valuable photograph of Billy Lovelady that we have. It was taken by a photographer who was commissioned by Mark Lane in the winter of 1964. And the man who took this picture, whose name I do not know, deserves, in my opinion, the Purple Heart for bravery in battle because of the way things were in Dallas at the time. You had the Dallas police, you had the Secret Service, and you had the FBI. And word spread very quickly that they were not going to allow any photographs taken of Lovelady. There were photographers that were dragged into the Dallas police station. They were harassed, threatened with arrest and imprisonment, and then summarily run out of town. But in defiance of authority, Mark Lane's photographer succeeded in capturing this picture of Lovelady. And what I want you to notice about it before I click is that he had very little hair on top, that in this area right here, on top and in front, that he had just a few strands, and I mean probably fewer than the fingers on both hands, that he combed back, but otherwise it was a bald pate. All right, meanwhile, the FBI took some photographs themselves in the winter of 1964 of Lovelady, and you can see one of them on the right here. They sent this photograph to the Warren Commission, and they tucked it into the back of the Warren report without any comment, without any analysis, without any acknowledgement, without any review whatsoever. They certainly did not use it in their determinations, and we don't even know if they looked at it. And it's important for me to point out that by putting it in the appendix, it guaranteed that very few people were going to see it, because there was no internet then where you could look things up. And most Americans, if they bought the Warren Report, they just bought the one-volume abridged version. That's all. They weren't going to shell out for 26 volumes of Warren Report. So, and this picture was not in the abridged version, so very, very few people got to see it. Now, the main thing I want you to notice here is that this guy on the right has got a lot more hair. He has a little bit of receding, but yet he still has darn good coverage on top, whereas this man on the left is practically bald on top. So that's a big problem for this FBI photo of Lovelady. But it's not the only problem. The other problem is that there's another version of it, which is the one on the left. Now, let me make it clear that this is definitely the same man, and it is definitely the exact same photograph. However, they used shadow and light to change the affect of the picture. There's a term they use in medicine called physiognomy, and it refers to the gut reaction, the visceral reaction that you get about a person from looking at them, about their character. And in this case, it's a very, very different effect. When I look at this man on the left, I see a very hard individual. To me, he looks like maybe he was a boxer who got hit too many times in the face. And now he probably works for the mob and goes around collecting debts, and if you don't pay, he breaks your knee with a lead pipe. That's the impression I get. But this guy on the right looks soft, gentle, easygoing, harmless, like maybe he's the scoutmaster of a Boy Scout troop.
On the left, you mean?
Well, on the right, he looks soft to me. On the right, he looks like just a soft, gentle person. On the left, our left, he looks harder, like he's kind of a tough guy. Now, the question is, which one of them really was Lovelady? Well, the answer is neither, because the real Lovelady was the one Mark Lane took, and he doesn't look as hard as that guy on the left, and he doesn't look as soft as this guy on the right. So I think both of these images were doctored. But which one did they send to the Warren Commission? Well, that depends upon who you ask. If you go to the Mary Farrell Foundation online, how many of you have heard of the Mary Farrell Foundation? Okay, well, let's say JFK Research Group, that they show this hard Lovelady as the image that the FBI sent to the Warren Commission. It was actually attached to a letter that was written by J. Edgar Hoover. So they show the letter, and they show the image of this hard Lovelady, and they don't even mention that this other version exists. But if you go to the JFK Lancer website, they show this soft Lovelady, and they don't mention about the existence of the other one. My opinion is that JFK Lancer is right, that this soft one is the one that was probably sent. And the reason why I say that is because of what they were aspiring for. You see, when they issued this photo, they were trying to accomplish two things. One was to sell the idea that he was the doorway man, so he had to look like the doorway man. But they also wanted to sell the idea that he was somebody who could easily be mistaken for Lee Harvey Oswald. And think about the stories that they told us. They told us that Lovelady's children saw Oswald on TV and thought it was their dad. You know, it's hard for me to believe that because Oswald was 5'9" and 131 pounds. We have the exact weight. I got it from Professor Gerald McKnight. It turns out that the Dallas police did weigh Oswald, and that's all he weighed. 5'9", 131 pounds. I mean, I'm 5'6", and I weigh more than that, and you can see how thin I am. So it goes to show you how slender Oswald was. But Lovelady weighed at this time, he was 5'8", and he weighed 170 pounds. The FBI, they weighed him and measured him, and that's what they put into their report. So he was essentially 40 pounds heavier and an inch shorter, and yet they're trying to tell us that people were easily mistaking the two, and it's something that I seriously doubt. Now, before we get to that one, I call this collage my irony collage. To me, there's a lot of irony in this collage, and I'll tell you why. In this photograph, Lovelady is posing as the doorway man. He was wearing the clothes that for 6 months he claimed he wore on November 22nd. The FBI put it in writing twice that Lovelady said that on the day of the assassination he wore a short-sleeved, red and white, short-sleeved shirt, just like you see here, and dark blue jeans. That's what they said. They put it in a letter to the Warren Commission, and they also wrote it down in an internal FBI memo. So we have it in writing twice. But then sometime later, it occurred to somebody that, whoops, the short sleeve shirt doesn't work. The doorman was wearing a long sleeve shirt. So they had to change the story and saying, well, no, we didn't mean that. He really wore a long-sleeved plaid shirt. But here's where the irony comes in. In this photo, Lovelady is posing as doorway man, but he is holding his hands behind his back. He's clasping his hands behind his back, just like this. Okay? Now, that's the way of standing that a lot of people do. I've never had the habit of standing that way myself. But the reason why it's so ironic is because the man in the doorway is standing the exact opposite way. You remember what I said before, that doorman has got to be resting his hand on something. He would not just hold it in space while he's watching it. And there was nothing else that he could put it on except for his other hand. So once I realized that, and I didn't realize it immediately, for a while I was racking my brain, but then it occurred to me, wait a second, he's clasping his hands. And as soon as I realized it, I began looking for pictures of Oswald clasping his hands. And I had no trouble finding them. This is the photo in which Oswald is doing it exactly the way I'm describing. He's clasping his left hand over his right, and if we if we draw that line down again, what we call in the profession a plumb line, we're seeing that it's really going exactly the same as the man in the doorway. Now I've also got here the frame from the Wigman film. And it's really the exact same thing. I realize that it's very poor quality. This is very blurry, but if we start with his chin and we come straight down, we realize that his hands are also clasped in front of his body. These are 3 more images. Here Oswald clasping his hands the same way, left over right. Here he is again, clasping his hands left over right. And by the way, I've got more of these that I didn't bring. Altogether, there's probably 7 or 8 photos of him clasping his hands. And now in this particular one, for some reason, he's clasping right over left, but he is still clasping. Now, this is the most important image of all of Oswald clasping his hands. And the reason why I say it's the most important is because he is doing it without handcuffs. In most of the other pictures, he's got handcuffs on, and my adversaries are quick to say, well, he's just doing that because he's in handcuffs. Well, that's really just a lame excuse, because there's plenty of pictures of people in handcuffs, and they don't all do that. They do various other things, but they don't do that. But in this case, they removed his handcuffs because they were getting ready to put him through a police lineup, and they obviously didn't want to have one guy in handcuffs, so they removed it. But he is still standing with his hand clasped exactly as I described, and the line comes down. It goes right to his wrist and his hand. And I like to put these two together. Again, it's because of that matching plumb line. It just simply comes down to the exact same spot. I mean, you can't beat that. That is the same guy doing the same thing at different times. Okay, and finally, this is the last hand picture to show you. This is Oswald clasping his hands the exact same way at the last conscious moment of his life. Here you've got Jack Ruby sticking a gun in his belly, Oswald clasping left over right. He is not handcuffed to himself. He is not handcuffed to the man on his left but our right. And he is handcuffed to the man in the white suit, who is Detective Jim Lavelle. Now, it's interesting that just this year, not long ago, they gave a commendation award to Jim Lavelle in Dallas, Texas, and I'm from Texas, for his performance on this day in 1963. And I began thinking to myself, how long have they been giving awards to people who failed at their job? Because here his responsibility was to escort Oswald to wherever they were taking him safely. And there was even discussion ahead of time about whether somebody might try to hurt Oswald. And they dismissed the idea that no, all precautions will be taken. And the interesting thing is that he said in his acceptance speech in Dallas that he tried to jerk Oswald behind him to keep him out of harm's way. And that was a lie, because the tape of this entire affair, this entire happening, is available online. You can see the whole thing. And at no time did Lavelle do anything to protect Oswald, but yet they gave him an award recently. And I have to think that, did they really give him an award for how well he did his job, or for how well he put Oswald in the line of fire? Okay. All right, now we're going to start talking about Billy Lovelady, and these are 3 images of Billy Lovelady from the day of the assassination. I'm not going to have time to go through all of this. I'm just going to have to briefly sum this up for you and say to you that, first of all, none of these guys was really Lovelady. Every single one of them was an imposter. Secondly, no 2 of them are the same imposter. They're each 3 different men. And third, not one of them was actually there on November 22nd, 1963. These are from movies that were taken. And what they did was to find ways, different ways, to put these guys in those movies after the fact, months later, and in some cases even years later. And I'm going to show you in a minute that they did have the technology by which to do that. But the reason why they did it is because for 6 months they maintained that Lovelady wore a short-sleeve shirt, and so did Lovelady. And when they decided that, nope, we have to maintain now that he wore a long-sleeve shirt, I think that they realized that just doing a little bit of wasn't going to cut it. They couldn't just change the story and say, no, it wasn't short-sleeve, it was long-sleeve. Nobody would believe them. Somebody said, look, we are going to have to come up with an image of him wearing this other shirt, or otherwise we'll have no credibility. That's why they made these phony movies, to show Lovelady in a long-sleeve shirt. But here's what I want to show you. This is Gene Kelly. This is a 1945 movie called Anchors Aweigh, and he is dancing with Jerry Mouse. And what it represents is footage of a real man dancing combined with cartoon footage of a mouse dancing, and they merged them together and it made it look like they were dancing together. And they did that in 1945, which was 18 years before the assassination. And now we have a movie from 1964 that was made in 1963, which was the year of the assassination. Mary Poppins, Dick Van Dyke, Julie Andrews, and again, you have real people performing, being filmed, where they merged it with cartoon footage of animals, put it together, made them look like one. That's what they did to put Lovelady into those movies. Now, this image of Lovelady is actually the most important one, because this is the one that they most often refer to as representing the looks of Billy Lovelady on the day of the assassination. It's supposedly from a film that was taken by Jack Martin. But remember what I said before, he wasn't the man in the doorway, and he was not Lovelady. Here we have a collage of this man here, and by the way, we come up with monikers for all these figures. When I first started talking about him, the name I gave him was Neanderthal Man, because I thought he looked, I don't know, kind of like a caveman, sort of unevolved. But in the end, the name we settled on was Jim Fetzer's choice, which is Gorilla Man. And he does look kind of like a gorilla, and I'll explain why in a minute. But on the left, you've got the FBI photo of the real Billy Lovelady. Now, we think that they doctored that. We know that they tinkered with his hairline, and they may have tinkered with other things, but that really was him, and at least some of the features really are his. So we can make a comparison. And what I'm saying, and I'm going to give you the breakdown of it, is there's no way that those two could be the same man. First of all, if you look at the shape of the head and the forehead, how it rolls down, it's very, very different. This man on the right has a ski slope head, and the real Lovelady, you can see more of a perpendicular kind of a formation. Lovelady's nose was longer, more prominent. He had a very short, stubby nose. He had very prominent brows. That's eyebrows, the brow bones, that is, and that's one of the reasons why we call him Gorilla Man. His ears were very different, and I'm going to show you the ears. And remember, Jim is the one who's often said that ears are as distinctive as fingerprints. Lovelady happened to have a very long, prominent lobule, which is the fleshy portion of the ear where the earring goes. This other man had a smaller, more compact ear, but the cartilage around the ear was much thicker. It was a much thicker ring of cartilage. So their two ears are about as different as any two ears can be. But the thing that stands out to me the most about the difference between these two relates to my experience as a chiropractor. Lovelady, the real Lovelady on that side, has a long neck, and it's a vertical neck, and the whole head-neck relationship is very healthy, very normal. It just looks right. This man on the right has a condition known as forward neck syndrome. That's what we call it in the profession. His neck is going as much forward as it is up. So it's going diagonally forward, which has the effect of shortening the neck. And another effect it has is it tends to leave the head in such a position that the eyes are looking down at the ground, which is no good, because obviously you need to have your eyes up so you can take in the whole world in front of you. So when a person has that kind of situation, what they do, and it happens subconsciously, is that their neck is going forward, but at the very top, where the neck meets the cranium, the head is pinched back on the neck. There are little muscles that connect the back of the head to the top of the neck called the suboccipital muscles. They're some of the shortest muscles in your body. But those muscles contract, and they pinch the head back so that it raises your eyes and you can see the world normally. And that's what he's doing there. It may be easier for me to see than you, but I can point something out that demonstrates it, and that is the axis of his ear. Now, if you look at the axis, meaning the long axis of Lovelady's ear, you notice that it's pretty vertical. It's pretty up and down. And that's because his head is sitting on his neck squarely and everything is normal. But if you look at this guy here, the axis of his hair is inclined backwards. It's going slightly diagonally backwards. And that's because his ear is attached to his head, and his head is being pinched backwards. Finally, I want to point out that, because in response to people who have asked this question, is it possible that Lovelady was just standing differently on 2 different days, and that he was just, cocking his head back and just holding himself differently on 2 different days? And the answer to that is no, absolutely not. Your postural habits are the most deep-seated habits that you have. They are so deeply entrenched into your subconscious that you can't possibly separate them out. If you think smoking is a deep-seated habit, or drinking, those are nothing compared to the deep-seated postural habits of the way you hold yourself, the way you move yourself, the way you negotiate the gravitational world in which we live. This is something that this man, whoever he wasn't Oswald, he wasn't Lovelady, was doing for a very long time. It was deeply ingrained in him. It may have started in his youth. Maybe his father went around like that and he was imitating him. But at this point, he is, a middle-aged man, and he is anatomically set that way. And I can guarantee you that he didn't look like that on November 22nd. No way, no chance. Here's just a close-up of the 2 ears, and I think it speaks for himself. There's just no way that those 2 ears are the same ear. That is simply impossible. Now, just as I said that this gorilla man does not match Lovelady, he doesn't match the doorway man either. I really think they were barking up the wrong tree when they tried to say that this guy was the doorway man. First of all, notice that they didn't even prop his shirt open. You can see very plainly that the top button of his shirt is unbuttoned, but otherwise, that shirt is cinched up. This picture was supposedly taken about 30 minutes after the assassination. So supposedly, this picture on this side, our left, is 30 minutes post the picture there. But nobody ever suggested that Lovelady was sprawled open and then later on he buttoned up. So this was simply a mistake that they made when they made the phony movie. They forgot to prop his shirt open. He looks about 30 pounds heavier than Oswald. And his shirt pattern is very different. If you notice, there's a little bit of contrast on Doorman's shirt, just a little bit of light and dark shading. But that is not plaid. Plaid, as you can see on Gorilla Man's shirt, represents horizontal and vertical lines that are crossing, forming boxes. Well, there's no boxes on Doorman's shirt. There are no vertical lines, and even what might be considered a horizontal line is really more like a splotch. So there's no parallel there at all. They are not the same man. There's another version of him that was taken by a guy named Hughes, and they're claiming that those 2 are the same guy at the same moment of time and space. But on that version, the shirt was propped open. This is the same second, and they're trying to tell us that that's the same guy. This is the film that it came from, and supposedly, I don't think so. And one of the reasons is that the quality of this film, the Martin film, is very poor. The colors are washed out. It's very grainy. And it's one of really the most poorest resolution images we have. Whereas that is actually one of the clearest, sharpest, and most vivid images that we have from the assassination. And therefore, how could it possibly be from the same camera and the same film? We believe this is the real photo of Lovelady from the day of the assassination. He walked down to the railroad crossing with Shelley. this picture was captured in the couch film, and in many ways, these two do physically correspond to Shelley and Lovelady. You can see the high hair on the Shelley figure. He wore his hair high like a pompadour. He wore a jacket. He had a slender build. On Lovelady, you're seeing the short-sleeve shirt that he claimed to have worn for the first 6 months after the assassination. We think the odds are very great that that's them. And then this is the other real picture of Lovelady from the day of the assassination, and we owe Richard Hook, one of our researchers, as being the person who first figured this out. But this really was Lovelady wearing his short-sleeve shirt. Notice that he has no face. I like to call him the headless horseman, but without the horse. And I'm telling you that it is photographically impossible for his face to have been blackened out just because he's got his hands visoring his eyes. That is ridiculous. There's no way your two hands could produce enough shade to blacken out your entire face. They blackened out his face because they were going to claim the other guy was Lovelady, and you can't have two Loveladies in one picture, so they had to get rid of his face. There's another bit of irony here. He really was visoring his eyes. Well, why was he visoring his eyes? Well, he was visoring his eyes because so much light was coming into his eyes that it was glaring, it was blinding, and so he had to reduce the light by putting his hands up there. But if that much light was coming into his eyes, how could his whole face be dark? So that's a contradiction in itself. And by the way, I've had the experience. When I was there last November, it was a sunny day, a sunny, warm day. And when you're standing in that doorway and that sun is coming in on your eyes, it really is blinding. So I had the experience myself. Okay. Okay, now this is I'm going to quickly go through this. It demonstrates an alteration that they did to the Alchin's photo. In this case, they put this figure next to the doorway man. He may have been in the photo, but he wasn't there. He was moved there. They had a reason why they wanted to cover up that side of Oswald. And they put this man here, and he is overlapping the shoulder of the doorway man. It's hard to see, but I've drawn a pink line which represents the slash of where doorman's shoulder was sheared. And from his neck, it's just a sheared line that comes down diagonally. Now that's me on the right standing in the same place, and I drew those lines in to show you that you can see the horizontal expanse of my shoulder. You see it going over horizontally, and you see the vertical expanse of my shoulder with my arm going up. And the point where they meet is the point of the shoulder. That's how it is for everybody. That's how it was for me, and that's how it was for Oswald too. But they put that other man in there in order to cover something up. Okay. All right, this is just another example of that. I've got two lines on him. One is the vertical axis line of his head, neck, spine. And because it's vertical, you know that he was standing in a neutral position. The diagonal line, which is drawn in white and black, represents his shoulder line. And you can see that it is steeply inclined. Now, normally when a person leans, you don't lean with your shoulders. You lean with your whole spine. The entire structure leans one way or the other. The implication of this picture is that Lovelady was standing in a neutral position, but inclining his shoulders like this. That is what the implication of that is. But if you look on the right, I have drawn back in the shoulder that was taken out. I've colored it in. And that's really how he was standing. And that's how the photo looked before they messed with it. Okay. Yeah, I meant doorman. Excuse me. Thank you, Jim. Thank you. This is the backyard photo on the right here. Quickly notice the chins. Can you see how different those two chins are? It looks very fat and wide on the right. And Oswald's chin, you can see on the left, wasn't that wide. This was another man's face. They moved Oswald's face to it, which is something Oswald himself admitted to, but they left the chin of the original man, and that's because they felt it would look more authentic rather than putting the whole face. Now, they did somewhat the opposite on the doorway man. When they saw it was Oswald in the doorway, and they decided they were going to try to sell the idea that he was really Lovelady, they were arrogant, but they weren't arrogant enough to think that words alone were going to convince people. They had to put something of Lovelady on him in order to turn him into Lovelady. And what they decided to do was to take the cap of Lovelady's head, which they got from this photo in the middle here, which is Lovelady from a few years earlier, and they moved it over. I want you to notice how identical it is. You don't see the birthmark. I'm not sure what that is, that little birthmark, because we don't see it on the other Lovelady. But the hairline is pretty much exactly the same, and the whole shape of the head, which comes across as being very oval and round, is the same on the two of them. But on Oswald, he had a much bigger cranium than Lovelady, and he had longer hair, and his hair stood up more, and the result was it gave the top of his head a steeple kind of a look. It was angular and jutting. So I believe that they moved the cap of Lovelady's head over to the doorway man, and that is the only thing about him that belongs to Lovelady. On the left, you're seeing the doorway man, the way he looked before they messed with the picture. I believe that that's what they started with. And on the right, you're seeing what resulted after they altered the top of his head. And here we have the whole progression. They started in the middle. They moved the top of his head over. And then when they got to photographing Lovelady the following February, they had to alter his hairline as well. They kept his hair really short because if they tried to put in long strands of hair, it would have looked fake. You can't falsify long hair so well, but you can short. And down below, you see what Lovelady really had. And this is a progression showing the same hairline for 7 years on Lovelady. And then between 64 and 67, supposedly it all fell out. So anyway, according to the official story, he had stable hair for 7 years, from 57 to 64, and then between 64 and 67, it all fell out. All right, this very quickly with the Warren Commission. This is the document 369. The arrow, you see that arrow there? That's an arrow that Fraser drew. Joseph Ball asked him to identify Lovelady in the photo. He drew that arrow and said it was Lovelady. But when it was Lovelady's turn, Ball did not even ask him who the doorway man is. He was afraid to because he didn't know what he was going to say. I am absolutely sure that he knew ahead of time that Fraser was going to play ball and do what he expected. So he just asked him point blank, this guy here, who is he? And Fraser said, Lovelady. He didn't do that with Lovelady, though, because he didn't know what Lovelady was going to say. He wanted to cover his butt. So what he did was, he just said, draw an arrow to Lovelady. So, and draw it in the dark. He told him, draw an arrow in the dark with a black pen. That reminds me of the old joke about the painting of a black cat with his eyes closed in a coal mine at midnight, and then when you see it, it's a black canvas. Well, that's what he had him do, draw it in the black. Why would he have him draw an arrow in the black with a black pen? Well, the answer was he didn't know where he was going to draw it, and he wanted to see it first himself before he made it visible in the picture. And when he saw it, he didn't like it. Do you see that little line that is overlapping the forearm of Black Hole Man? That is the tail of the arrow that Lovelady drew. The head of it is in the black, and you can't see it because it was drawn black on black. But the tail of it, And I don't know if Lovelady deliberately covered a little bit of flesh color with it because he wanted to make the arrow shown, or if it was just an accident that it just overlapped it. But that is the only other marking on that photograph. The big arrow is Fraser's, the small arrow is Lovelady's. What that tells me is that even as late as April 1964, Lovelady was trying to tell the truth. And when Ball saw that, he must have freaked. And it was only a month later that Lovelady started singing their tune. And in an interview, he started saying, oh yeah, that was me in the doorway, etc., etc. But my thinking is that Ball must have talked to somebody who talked to somebody who talked to somebody who sent some goons to talk to Lovelady and straighten him out and convince him that for the sake of his health, he better start saying the right thing. Okay, all right, I have just one final point to make, and I'm going to turn this over to Jim Fetzer. And that point has to do with Robert Groden. How many of you have heard of Robert Groden? Okay, well, I got to tell you honestly, I have got a beef with Robert Groden because he was hired by the House Select Committee to investigate the doorman issue, and in my mind, he sold out to them. Do you remember that photo I showed you at the beginning of Oswald and the doorway man together? Groden never put a picture of Oswald and doorway man together to see how they looked. He never did what I did. Instead, he went to Denver and took this picture of Lovelady wearing a plaid shirt in Denver, which means nothing, and Lovelady has it propped open, pressed over to create kind of an artificial sprawl, like he was getting dapper for the hootenanny or the square dance. He went to work that morning in 1963 to lay plywood flooring on the dusty 6th floor of the book depository. Do you think that he propped his shirt open like that and had it all pressed over? No way did he do that. Groden lied. It says here that Groden said that he detected a pattern of lines that corresponded in pattern and color to Lovelady's plaid shirt rather than to Oswald's tweed. And that was a lie, because you can see here, and this was a coloring job that Groden did, but there's absolutely nothing about the pattern of doorman's shirt that corresponds in any way to the pattern that we see on Lovelady. So, as far as I'm concerned, Groden sold out, and that he has done more harm to the JFK Truth Movement than anybody else who claims to be a conspiracy advocate. This is a group of pictures that he used to make his comparison. I would like somebody to raise their hand and tell me who's missing from that picture. Oswald. There's no picture of Oswald. It says here on the bottom that this is a photographic evidence that was evaluated by Robert Groden in his shirt analysis. Well, where's the picture of Oswald? He's got a picture. He's got 3 pictures there of Lovelady, and then he's got pictures from the films. The only thing he's got of Oswald is a shirt, and it doesn't even look like Oswald's shirt. So again, this was a complete sellout. And then the last thing I'll say is that the other thing the House Select Committee did was have a bunch of anthropologists make minute measurements of these 2 photographs, and the actual photographs here are flipped. Do you know what I mean when I say flipped? I mean it's a mirror image where right was left and left was right. For some reason, they gave flipped images to compare, and they did all this minute analysis, measuring the distance between the eyes, measuring the distance between the nose and the mouth, things like that. But in the end, all they could say was that, well, the doorway man is too blurry to make any measurements, but we kind of sort of think that he looks more like Lovelady, so in all probability he was Lovelady. So in other words, all that technical measuring amounted to absolutely nothing. This is my final collage, and I'm turning it over to Jim. I wanted to include this collage. It was made by one of our senior members, a man named Donald Fallon. It's one of my favorite collages because the likeness is so great. The shape of the face, the sprawl, the hand clasp, everything is perfect. The whole idea that Billy Lovelady could have looked that much like Oswald and dressed that much like Oswald and stood that much like Oswald is absolutely preposterous. And I'm asking you all to help me fight this so that we can win this battle. Thank you very much. Okay.
That was great. That was great. That was a wonderfully convincing presentation, Ralph. I'm very happy with that. And it's easy to see why you were the founder of the Oswald Innocence Campaign.